Saint Thérèse was born into a world of intense political and social conflict. The decade of the 1860s, in which Zélie and Louis Martin each lost their father, and then 3 children prior to the birth of their daughter Céline, also saw the initial stirrings of the conflict which would become the Franco-Prussian War, erupting in the summer of 1870. Half their town's residents fled during the conflict, and another of the Martin daughters died in infancy. The family witnessed an enormous amount of suffering with food shortages and disabled soldiers returning from the front. During this time, Zélie's sister-in-law also lost a baby. Speaking of the deaths of her own children, Zélie wrote this to her. "When I closed the eyes of my dear children and buried them, I felt the sorrow indeed, but it has always been resigned sorrow. I did not regret the pain and cares I had borne for them. Several people had said to me, 'It would have been better if you had never had them,' but I could not endure this kind of language. I did not think that the sufferings and anxieties could be weighed in the same scale with the eternal happiness of my children. Then they were not lost forever. Life is short and full of miseries, and we shall find them again up yonder." Zélie offered her children back to God when they died. As we've discussed in this book, suffering is accepted and given over to God, and in that way, it inevitably becomes a site of extraordinary grace. Day's retrieval of Thérèse's spirituality is unique in that it extends this principle, like the practice of offering small daily acts of love, from the personal to the social sphere. Chapter 4, War and Unrest, provides some context for the socio-political world of the Martin family. In this, Day finds clear parallels with the Cold War-era anxieties and tensions of her own time. Many letters of Zélie Martin's extensive correspondence with her husband, siblings, in-laws, and daughters have survived, and Day draws extensively from these to determine the material and psycho-spiritual conditions of the family during this time period. Zélie's letters indicate that she had no interest in frivolity and was not impressed with the excesses of the rich. Her correspondence contains a fairly sympathetic letter where she describes the arrest of a peasant man who flung a bag of frogs he had caught with the intent to sell into the lap of a rich lady wearing furs, who was comically flustered by the whole affair. The Martins, according to Day, did not seem to challenge or question the class system that they lived in, but they did not esteem the rich, and they devoted a day a week to caring for the poor and taught their children that performing the works of mercy was a privilege. During the war, the Martin family depended on hard work and God's providence, as they always had. Zélie faced the war machine of the Prussian army with the same steadfast fortitude and a certain amount of resignation that she had applied to personal and family tragedies. While Day, a pacifist, did not accept just war reasoning, she notes that Zélie felt that French attempts to resist the Prussian military were futile, and that Zélie understood that a war with no realistic chance of success could not be just and would only result in a waste of life. Day is willing to retroactively consider the arguments of the just war tradition as a critique of her own time, however, noting that during the Franco-Prussian War, neither side employed the kind of psyops that are so commonplace in the contemporary era, with horrific images and stories demonizing the opposing forces. Day states that neither nuclear weapons nor lying propaganda would have been acceptable means in those days. Mentions of nuclear weapons throughout the text remind us that Day is writing in the immediate aftermath of the US bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. The blasphemous destruction of human life and the exultant response of the American press haunted Day, and she devoted her September 1945 column to a lament and prophetic denunciation of the attack. She wrote, "Mr. Truman was jubilant. President Truman. True man. What a strange name, come to think of it. We refer to Jesus Christ as true God and true man. True man is a true man of his time in that he was jubilant. He was not a son of God, brother of Christ, brother of the Japanese, jubilating as he did. He went from table to table on the cruiser, which was bringing him home from the Big Three conference, telling the great news. Jubilant, the newspapers said. Jubilate Deo. We have killed 318,000 Japanese. But our Lord himself already pronounced judgment on the atomic bomb. When James and John the beloved, wished to call down fire from heaven on their enemies, Jesus said, "You know not of what spirit you are. The Son of Man came not to destroy souls, but to save." He also said, "Whatever you do to these least of my brethren, you do to me." During the time that Day was at work on Thérèse, the state of New York made it a misdemeanor offense to refuse to participate in the nationwide civil defense drills in which civilians were expected to take cover in the locations where they would theoretically shelter in the event of a nuclear attack. Day, along with Eamon Hennessy, Bayard Rustin, and other pacifist and anarchist activists, understood participation in Operation Alert as a form of cooperation with militarism. They staged a series of sit-ins in New York City public parks. Day was arrested for this 5 times between 1955 and 1959. At their trials, Day and Hennessy and the others who pleaded guilty pledged their loyalty to God, even at risk of disobedience and subversion to the coercive state, and served jail time. These protests expanded over the years, and in 1961, over 2,000 people joined, including a large group of mothers pushing their children in strollers. As a result of this initially small act of resistance, the United States ended the annual drills in 1962. In her September 1945 column, Day names the scientists, politicians, and universities, including Notre Dame, which gained power, prestige, and funding through their development and promotion of the new atomic weapons. As we continue our study of Dorothy Day's Thérèse, we must ask ourselves what it means to practice the little way in the post-bomb era. What does the little way mean in a country made rich by the defense economy, but which leaves millions to languish in the poorest neighborhoods of its own cities? Reading about wars and rumors of wars from our own comfortable standpoint in the present time, it can be tempting to forget the fear and insecurity people lived with during periods of past conflict. The future was as uncertain then as it is now. However, Day presents Zélie and Louis and their daughters as a family who accepted this instability and bore up under it with an eye not only to their own well-being, but to the common good. As she writes, who could tell what would happen in the future, what wars between nations or between classes would wipe out this or that aspect of their security? They had their hands and their strength, and as long as these endures, the Martins would work. They would save as they had in the past, and their savings would make the kind of home in which it would be easier to be good. Day connects this idea to Aquinas, who tells us that we need a certain modest amount of goods to live a good life. This idea of a world where it is easier to be good comes to us from Peter Morin, who co-founded the Catholic worker movement with Day, and it speaks to a central principle of Catholic workers' spirituality and praxis. Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and sheltering the homeless are important, yes, but it's not enough to do the works of mercy in isolation. The work is meant to be transformative, the first germination of a new world order which supports human flourishing and virtue, one where everyone has enough and it's easier to be good. Day writes, the Martins knew well the beginnings of peace, the beginnings of the good society are in the home. Like Thérèse, Day never fails to emphasize the significance of the small, the domestic, the interpersonal, and the homey, whether that means a family home, a convent, or a house of hospitality. However, the seeds of peace and a good society nurtured in the home do not end at the front door of the house. They have their beginning, but not their end there. For Day, peace must keep flowing outward from these small acts of virtue until the entire world is caught up and transformed in the flood.